Hi, everybody. It's Global Politics with Jim Martin. And today I want to talk about tariffs. Who pays for them and what are they and all of that sort of thing. Tariffs are a tool that was really used a lot in the early years of our country to protect growing industries from competition from those in Europe. To prevent a just overwhelming flow of imported goods that would prevent those kind of baby industries from growing up and becoming productive on their own. These were a major source of government revenues for a century and a half before income taxes kind of caught up with and surpassed those tariff fees. Tariffs began to be critiqued to a greater or lesser degree during the Depression. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that a series of tariffs put in place by Roosevelt administration in the early 30s probably contributed to a deepening of the Depression. After World War II, tariffs just about disappeared entirely. And the reason for that was that the priority of the United States as a superpower was to create a much broader trade environment. So they made this sort of trade-off of, hey, countries that aren't Russia and proxies, how about if we kind of protect global trade and, protect in some sense your countries. And in exchange for that, you will open up your markets. And so this is the era of the incredible growth of globalization and international trade. It just grew at an exponential rate after World War II. Everything was hunky-dory with that for a really long time. As we know, there's been a growing sense of kind of retrenchment away from that. Nothing really makes that more clear than how the Trump administration, soon after taking office, began to levy tariffs on a whole range of countries' products. It's created a number of dynamics, which we can get into. But in essence, there are two purposes for a tariff. One is economic, to protect a home country's industries and allow them to be more price competitive against imports. The political purpose of tariffs is to punish those firms in those foreign countries and, frankly, to punish the retailers that are selling the import goods within the United States, for instance. Other countries use tariffs too. How does that play out in practice? Well, the tariffs that were put into place by the Roosevelt administration during the Depression, a lot of evidence to suggest that their effect was really the opposite. It damaged some of those industries. Record on it being a net benefit to a country to use tariffs is mixed at best. I suppose there are some special circumstances where a tariff really could be useful. And frankly, as a political tool to punish a adversarial country's firms, I think is something that you can't really critique too much. That said, as an economic tool, they're not that great. From a diplomatic perspective, launching into a regime of tariffs against countries is something akin to parking an aircraft carrier off the coast. There's always been a little bit of tariff activity on particular goods, but when you start making wide-ranging sets of tariffs on tons of different things, it's a real threat. The only problem is with tariffs too, when you put them on to a country's firms, that country doesn't care for that very much. They may respond in a variety of asymmetrical ways. One of them is dumping, where they just take all of the leftover stuff that they had that they were preparing to export, mark it down to almost nothing, and sell it anyway in your marketplace. They pay the tariff and it's still cheaper. The other deleterious effect of tariffs is that they contribute to inflation because they increase the price of the goods that are sold. And domestic manufacturers are often like, hey, price has gone up on the foreign import stuff, we can raise our prices too, thus contributing to inflation. Let me explain in a basic sense how these work. In a perfect system, you'd have a foreign manufacturer that would create some good. Generally speaking, they would have lower labor costs and thus be able to produce that item for less money. Then they sell it to a US retailer. That US retailer brings it in. There's always some fees associated with, okay, you brought it into a port, you have to pay some fees and duties, and then those items are stored at various retailers who then distribute them. Then consumers buy them, right? That's a perfect world of almost free trade. Let's say that we're going to have a tariff regime. So the foreign manufacturer makes the item for export and then exports them to these US retailers. Well, when the US retailer takes delivery, then they have to pay the tariff. Okay, that's one step in this that provides a bit of information. The foreign manufacturer is not paying the tariff. They're paying the price for the tariff eventually, but in the beginning, that's the US retailer that is bearing that burden. So what do? So they're going to buy this item. They're going to have to add in a cost to compensate themselves for the tariff amount. Now, a lot of people see these massive corporations and think that they make a lot of money, and they do. However, profit margins for most companies are around 10 to 12% at best. So let's say that you're an importer, you sell a lot of things that you're importing that get tariffs on them. That's going to seriously cut into your profit margin because we've seen tariffs on some things of 10, 15, 20% in cases. So that's going to hurt you. You're not going to be able to afford to stay in business if you have a 1% profit margin versus a 10 or 12%, which is frankly risky enough as it is. Let's not feel sorry for them. That said, this is the realities that the people who run these places are thinking about. So they have to pass that on to the consumer. They pass that price on to the consumer who could have bought something for less money, saved some bucks. We're talking about roughly equivalent items. Let's talk about a washing machine, for instance, or a bottle of wine or something like that. They're pretty much the same thing. You know, there may be subtle differences. There may be slight quality differences. In essence, they're the same thing. It's not like importing cars that were built in the Soviet Union. That's not the kind of comparison we're talking about. With many of these items, I got to have a washing machine. You know, what am I going to do? So I have to spend that extra money, which precludes me from spending money on other things. But that overall increase in price, which generates inflation, which is kind of part of the why we're here now, right? So we had this long period of having these tariffs in place during the Trump administration. Then Biden comes in, he reduces a lot of tariffs on our allies, but leaves certain ones in place for a variety of things and pretty much leaves the China ones intact. May have added a few. That's one of the causes of the inflation that we've experienced over the past few years. Did they serve their purpose, politically speaking, of punishing Chinese manufacturers or European manufacturers? Probably. But the real burden is on the US consumer. That's the one who's paying for this ultimately. You know, these are the kinds of things that you have to think of. Who pays for tariffs? You and I do. That's the bottom line. Do they punish foreign manufacturers? A little bit. Is it probably a good idea to buy things that are made domestically? Absolutely. However, when you take that choice away from me by outpricing me with a domestically made product that I could have bought the same equivalent product, even sometimes the same parts in it, I don't care for that. I'm not a fan of tariffs. The other thing about all this is that countries get very angry when this happens, and those firms get angry. They just shift into different markets, and you haven't really hurt them at all. Now, I've created a real short kind of skit-like piece that sort of breaks down how this whole process works. I think it's pretty funny. It's very simplistic, but I hope that you find it interesting. I need to buy a new washing machine, but I don't want to spend that much. We've got washing machines. We have this kind, which is made in our country, and this other one that's made in a foreign country. Oh, cool. Are they as good as the other washing machines? They're pretty much the same thing. Well, then it's cheaper. I'll buy that one. Hold on there a minute. We don't like it that you're buying stuff from foreign places. So we're going to charge a tariff to you, retailer. Now that we got hit with the tariff, we've got to pass that cost on to our consumers. Sorry about that. Now it's as expensive as the other ones? Well, I don't really have any choice, do I? I hope this video was informative, and if you like this kind of stuff, please subscribe. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks.